everyone to our Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA webinar, where we'll be talking about women in finance and leading teams through change. I'm Nicolette Tavares, and I'm a Senior Accounting Manager at a Fortune 200 company based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm also the Chartered Accountant Network's USA Chapter President for Nashville and a CASA and CPA. I'm very happy to be your moderator for today. We have 3 guest speakers today based out of the US who will be sharing insights on key aspects relating to leading teams through change. Before we begin the webinar, some housekeeping items. Handouts are available. You can download these from the control panel for the event. For CPE and polls, this webinar is CPE eligible if you have selected it. To qualify, you will need to answer the polling questions we will be asking during the webinar. There are 5 polls during the webinar. Please answer at least 3 of these to be eligible for the CPE credit. The webinar consists of a 60-minute presentation, and you would need to attend at least 50 minutes to be eligible for CPE. If you have any questions, please note them in the Q&A tab on your control panel. At the end of the event, when you exit, there'll be a short survey, so please do let us know what you think. Let us know if you want us to connect you to the speakers. We will be recording the presentation and we'll make it available on our website after any editing and approval by the presenters. So I'd like to kick us off with a quote today. Few things are more important during a change event than communication from leaders who can paint a clear and confidence-inspiring vision of the future. So in this webinar today, we'll be talking through 3 key aspects of leading through change: culture as a catalyst for change, shaping a future-ready finance team, and managing change resistance. Before I introduce the speakers, I would like to go through some objectives of our webinar. So today we are going to be learning about exploring the link between team performance and agility and adaptability, learn the leadership strategies to build high-performing teams for change readiness, understand other techniques for leaders to embed adaptability as a team norm, explore the strategic role of automation in finance and how automation is reshaping finance, discover strategies and benefits of driving a culture of automation-driven change, understand ways in which leaders can foster the innovative mindsets in their teams, understand how teams can recognize change resistance early, and learn practical approaches to proactively address change resistance with teams and stakeholders. And so with that, let me launch our first poll. Okay, in the meantime, while you complete the poll, I will introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Linda Null, and she will be speaking to us on culture as a catalyst for change. Linda is a globally experienced real estate executive with over 22 years of success in capital markets, investment management, and platform transformation. She has deployed over 1.3 billion euros in private debt across the UK and Ireland, led major capitalization in M&A transactions, and raised capital from top-tier institutional investors. Known for her ability to drive growth, operational leadership in directing cross-functional teams, operational efficiency, and institutional grade performance, Linda has held senior leadership roles at Reliant Real Estate, KPMG, and Quadrant Real Estate Advisors. Linda is a CPA and CASA and is based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Linda is also a member of the Core Network USA executive team, focusing on member engagement. And now let me close the poll and share the results. Linda, I will now hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicolette, for that warm introduction. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Linda Null, and I'm delighted to be here with my fellow CAW board members to discuss women in finance and leading teams through change. My focus today is culture as a catalyst for change, and specifically how we build high-performing and agile teams during periods of transformation. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to share 3 leadership strategies that I've used throughout my career to help teams not just survive change, but truly thrive through it. So as consultants and advisors, we are the catalyst for change. That's really what we do, isn't it? We step into organizations at critical inflection points and help them navigate transformation. And my approach, regardless of the industry or specific challenge, has always centered around three fundamental questions. Sorry, Nicolette, can you just go back to the previous slide? Perfect, thanks. So the first question is, where are we now? Understanding the current state, what's working, what's not, and where the pain points are. Where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And it's important to envision the destination. What does success look like for this team and this organization? And how do we get there? Building the practical roadmap that takes us from where we are to where we need to be. So throughout my career in investment management, I've worked with very talented, high-performing teams. These teams excelled within their existing framework. They knew their markets, they understood their work, and they maintained very strong relationships. But my role has consistently been to help them expand those capabilities to meet new challenges. And what I've learned applies far beyond investment management. These principles build adaptable, high-performing teams. These principles build adaptable, high-performing teams no matter what industry it is. Whether you're in finance and operations or technology, it can be applied to all of these fields. Okay, perfect. Next slide. Thanks, Nicolette. So let me set the context. We're operating in an environment where change isn't occasional, it's constant. And while I'm drawing from experiences in investment management, I think that we can all relate to this reality. Regulatory frameworks are evolving. Stakeholder expectations are shifting. Market dynamics are transforming continuously. And competitive pressures demand continuous adaptation. This isn't unique to investment management. Every industry faces the same reality. Technology companies are disrupting business models. Healthcare is navigating regulatory changes. Even traditional industries are forced to adapt, or they're becoming irrelevant. So the fundamental question becomes, are your teams ready? Are they built not only to perform well today, but then to adapt and thrive when conditions change tomorrow? Next slide. Okay, so here's the complication I've encountered repeatedly throughout my career. High-performance teams in one context does not automatically translate into adaptability in another. So let me say this again because it's critical. Success in one context does not equal success in another context. This very approach and behaviors that drive success can actually become barriers during transformation. And I've seen this play out in different ways. At one organization, let's call company A, we were building a European platform under new regulations. The team had very deep investment expertise. They understood real estate, they understood underwriting, and they understood risk. But they had very limited experiences with cross-border regulations and completely different investor cultures. Nordic pension funds have very different mandates from US investors. German insurance companies had very different constraints. What worked in one market didn't automatically work in another. At company B, I worked with technically strong teams who were excellent at analysis. And they could execute flawless due diligence. But they struggled to bring in new business. They struggled to think commercially. They had technical skills. They just needed to learn how to apply these skills to build executive relationships and spot broader opportunities beyond immediate transactions. So here's what I've learned. Investment teams, or really any teams, optimized purely for execution in stable environments often lack the resilience needed when things change. And core skills often need to be reapplied in different contexts. Next slide, please. So when transformation hits, I see three things happen consistently, almost like clockwork. First is risk aversion. Teams rely on old methods because those methods always work. This is how I always have done it, becomes the default response. People become too afraid to experiment or deviate from established processes because those processes have always delivered results in the past. Second is slow decision making. We wait for the perfect information that never comes during transformation. And we're all paralyzed by uncertainty. In stable conditions, we wait for complete data. During transformation, that perfect information doesn't exist. So decision making just grinds to a halt. Then third is talent attrition. Uncertainty and misalignment causes people to leave. Your best performers start to feel uncertain when structure and expectation shifts beneath them. They look for stability elsewhere, and you risk the very people that you need most to navigate change. So the stakes are incredibly high. High-performing teams can completely stall if they're not built for agility, and we simply cannot afford to lose our best people during periods of change. Next slide, please. So the critical question becomes, and these are the questions that we need to solve for as leaders. The first question, how do we build teams, whether it's investment teams or any other kind of team, that maintain high performance while developing the agility to navigate change constantly? Second question, how do we help talented people pivot and apply their existing skills in new contexts without losing discipline or confidence? Because that's really the tension, isn't it? We can't sacrifice discipline and rigor. We can't lose investor confidence or stakeholder trust, but we also need to be flexible and adaptive. And the answer lies in three leadership principles that I'm going to walk you through now. The next slide. So build structure that enables confidence. Leading through change requires showing up constantly, even when, I think especially when, you don't know all the answers. Your team needs to see that you're persevering through the uncertainty alongside of them. The steady presence creates psychological safety, and that psychological safety allows teams to take calculated risks and experiment with new approaches. But with steady presence isn't always enough. You need to build the right structure. First, provide clarity, not bureaucracy. So I'm talking, what I'm talking about here really is framework, not red tape. Second, define decision rights and boundaries. This allows your team to move with conviction. And then third, build framework that accelerate, not slow down that execution. So let me give you a concrete example. We were raising capital across Europe and structured investment teams that needed to comply with multiple regulatory regimes. We worked with advisors to optimize structures, secure regulatory approvals, and establish the governance framework. But here's the key. Investors saw professionalism and agility. This structure gave them confidence that we knew that what we were doing, but also showed us how to move quickly on opportunities. The overarching theme here is don't micromanage your team. Establish clear criteria and performance expectations. Strategy 2. Help your people see how their existing strengths apply in new context. I've learned that you can't transform a platform or organization without helping people recognize and adapt their capabilities. And here's the good news. When facing transformation, you're rarely replacing the entire team. You're helping the existing team members pivot and apply their experience in different ways. Maintain a positive outlook during transformation isn't about pretending those challenges doesn't exist. It's about believing in your team's ability to navigate them. You won't always have the answers, and that's fine. What matters most is about showing up. Keep problem solving and believing that the path is going forward. So first, it's important to recognize transferable skills. Show your team how their existing skills can translate into a new context. Involve your team in problem solving, so bring them into the process. And then third, reframe setbacks, learning opportunities. So this is how you build muscle in teams, by helping people see what they already have and then what skills they do need. And then that recognition builds confidence and accelerates adoption. So then strategy 3 is to empower your team to make decisions and align everybody around what matters. So one of the most powerful things that you can do as a leader during change is empower your team to make decisions in your absence. When you establish clear decision-making, a clear decision-making framework, and then trust in their judgment, you're not only building efficiencies, but you're building confidence and capability. Your team learns by doing, and they develop the judgment that's needed to navigate ambiguity. Okay, then next slide. So here's how it all comes together. The performance agility link that we've been building towards. When structure enables confidence, when strengths are repurposed for new context, and when teams align around stakeholder outcomes, 4 things happen. Team anticipate market shifts. They don't just react after the fact. They adapt strategies proactively. They see what's coming and adjust before they're forced to. They build ownership and resilience. People take responsibility for their outcomes and not just the tasks. And they create sustainable growth, not just short-term wins, but really long-term platform development. Next slide. So as leaders, we're all catalysts for change, right? Our job is to understand where our teams are, where they envision that they need to go, and to build the roadmap to get there. We are the catalyst for change. Sustainable transformation builds a culture of adaptability. It's not just about one-time fixes or a flavor of the month initiative. It's about fundamental cultural shifts in how our team operate every day. High performance and agility can and must reinforce each other. They're not trade-offs. When we build the right culture, it works together. And adaptability is the new competitive advantage. Teams and organizations that will lead their industries forward aren't the ones with the best strategy for today's conditions. They're the ones that can adapt those strategies when conditions change tomorrow. The most sustainable transformations don't just change processes. They build cultures where adaptability becomes the norm, where high performance and agility reinforces each other. And so that's how we create teams that don't just survive change, they lead through it. So with that, my section comes to a conclusion. Thanks, Nicolette.
Thank you, Linda, for that great presentation, and we're looking forward to the Q&A. Okay, I'm going to launch the second poll here. Right. So while the second poll should have come up on your screen. And while you're answering that, I'm going to introduce our second speaker today. Our second speaker is Shingi Gwindingwi, who will speak to us about how female leaders can shape a future-ready finance team. So Shingi, who is a CPA and CASA, is an accomplished accounting professional with deep expertise in public, technical, and operational accounting. She spent 9 years at BDO in the US and South Africa, building a strong foundation in public accounting, and currently serves as an experienced managing consultant at Cross Country Consulting, where she advises on complex technical and operational accounting matters. Shingi is treasurer and board member of Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA and is based out of New York. Okay, I think we're almost there. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, Shingi, and now I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Nicolette. I will be talking about how we can shape a future-ready finance team, one that not only adapts to change, but drives it through automation and innovation. As Nicolette mentioned, I worked in audit for 9 years, and now I'm in consulting, and I've seen how adapting to automation and innovation has played a big role in both industry and in audits. As we all know, automation and innovation are here and not going anywhere. We've all experienced innovation in our everyday lives somehow. AI is now incorporated in almost everything that we use on a day-to-day. So why not shape our finance teams for a future that's driven by automation and AI? Next slide. So finance has evolved from being the keeper of books to being more of a strategic partner. Automation is accelerating the shift, moving us from manual processing to insight generation and business influence being led by finance teams. And it really doesn't matter how junior the team member is to have some great insight of the business as a result of automation and AI. Next slide. A future-ready finance team isn't just tech savvy. So what does it actually mean to have a future-ready finance team? It means the team is agile, curious, and focused on value creation rather than repetitive tasks. As I mentioned before, I work in consulting and I work with tech companies. And one of my clients is a tech giant and brings in over $1 billion in revenue per month. And they have a few revenue streams. I had the opportunity of working with the team that processes about 3/4 of that, more than $1 billion. And the team is made up of 5 people, 3 senior analysts and a manager and a senior manager. And they are able to do this because they've leveraged automation and AI in a lot of their day-to-day work. This team can easily be made up of 10 to 15 people just because of the volumes of the day-to-day transactions that they have to deal with, or the processing every single day. But through automation, the team spends a lot of their time continuously learning how to make their automations better and what to automate in order to streamline their processing. Next slide. Automation is already transforming core finance processes. And on this slide, I just have a few examples of what can be automated in your finance teams if you're wondering what you can actually automate. I personally have seen automations of reconciliations that have blown my mind, and I've seen how they reduce errors, how they speed up the close cycle and free capacity for your teams to focus on the work that really matters. Next slide. So just to talk briefly about the benefits of automation-driven change, when teams are freed up from repetitive work, they can focus on higher value activities, which leads to happier teams. Analyzing trends, shaping strategy, and partnering with businesses. Just, those are some of the benefits of automation-driven change. Next slide. I think also there's, the human element that comes with automation, and automation does not replace people. I think there's a misconception that automation tends to replace people. However, it actually amplifies their impact. The key is to invest in skills that make finance professionals effective in a tech-driven environment. So we need to consider upskilling and reskilling critical team members. We need to encourage curiosity and digital literacy through experimentation. And we also need to build cross-functional collaboration between finance, IT, and operations, which will lead to analytical thinking, storytelling with data, and digital fluency. Next slide. On the slide here, we have a roadmap to future-ready team. These are steps that will help your teams with their transformation. And it's not about technology alone. It's about creating a culture that allows teams to feel empowered through automation. I'll give you an example. My client, the tech giants that I mentioned earlier, they have Hack Week like most tech companies. But what's different with the finance team is they don't need the entire Hack Week, right? Because it's finance, they're not really like the technological part of the business. But just dedicating an hour for the finance team to focus on coming up with ideas on how to utilize AI in their work, how to improve their automations, I think that goes a really long way. An hour during that whole week, they don't need a full day, just an hour. And it doesn't end there. Regrouping with the teams to actually discuss the ideas that they came up with to see what you can implement also makes the teams feel empowered. Investing in the technology and data infrastructure and prioritizing high impact automation areas also helps. Companies that use Google as their infrastructure, for example, have an advantage of this, as I find that Google as a platform is very integrated. They have BigQuery, they have Gemini, all of that, which kind of like makes the automation a little bit easier because you're all using platforms that are created to enable the automation. Next slide. So a real example many organizations see is that automation shortens close cycles dramatically, creating more time for analysis and business partnering. In the example above, I have a month-end close that was reduced from 10 days to 5 days because of automation and AI. Real life example, again, my client, even though they process about $700 million per month in revenue, their close is actually 3 days. And they've achieved that because they've automated a lot of their reconciliations, and they also use AI in their day-to-day work. Next slide. However, any type of change comes with its own set of challenges, such as change resistance and fears of job loss, data integrity and integration issues, lack of clear ownership between finance and IT for some items that IT may assist the team with. To succeed, we must tackle cultural and technical challenges, ensuring that automation is seen as an enabler, not a threat. Someone said to me that AI is like an intern. It's only as good as you instruct it, and you have to review the work that the intern AI has done, because the intern may not get the work right all the time. So with that in mind, we definitely need to make sure that we have people who are doing the work. We have people who are reviewing the work that AI is generating and whatever automation is doing, because we also need to make sure that the data that we're presenting is complete, and we're checking that everything is correct that has been performed by automation and AI. Finance and IT teams will also have to work in collaboration with each other for the automation goals to be met, and both teams should take ownership. Again, the client that I mentioned earlier, they have weekly calls with IT to discuss the pipeline and the progress of the pipeline, and to make sure that whatever projects that they are aligned with the projects that they're working on, and if any testing is needed, that the finance team is doing the testing timely, and they're letting the IT team know timely that changes need to be made. So that collaboration, I've seen that it comes in very handy, because you don't want any team to be confused about what's going on with the automation that you're trying to implement. Next slide. In short, shaping a future-ready finance team is about aligning technology with talent. When automation and human insight work together, finance becomes a true catalyst for transformation in the company. That's all I have to say. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shingi, for those wonderful insights. For our participants, I will be launching our third poll. And as you respond, we'll move to our next speaker, Nancy Chakabuda, who will speak to us about how to manage resistance to change. I'd also like to remind everyone to please post your questions in the Q&A tab on your control panel. So Nancy is a transformational leader who's passionate about influencing positive organizational change, coaching, and people development. She has a demonstrated background in building highly functional and culturally diverse global teams. Nancy works as a senior accounting director for a Fortune 200 American multinational company based in Indianapolis. She is an alumni Psycha Top 35 Under 35 finalist, where she also won the LEAD Award. Nancy is a CASA and a member of CPA US. She is driven by continuous learning and uplifting others. She's an experienced board member of nonprofit organizations and is the Vice President of Chartered Accountants Worldwide, USA. Nancy, I'll now hand over to you. Oh, sorry, let me first close our poll. Right. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks for that introduction, Nicolette, and good day all. I'm very, very excited to be here to talk about how leaders can manage resistance to change. I think this is a topic that I feel like is not talked about enough, particularly in this era that we find ourselves as finance leaders, right? Where we have what we can call always on change. I wanted to start off, next slide please, Nicolette. I wanted to start off with a quote by Ahmed Ray that you see on the slide, which is change management requires strong emotional and social intelligence. It is a part of inside-out leadership. And so this quote aptly denotes that leading change is beyond technical skills for us as finance leaders. It's about how we tap into our inner selves, into our emotional awareness, that inside-out leadership, to understand others, to connect and build trust with them in a way that fosters buy-in and support for any change that we're leading with our teams. Next slide, please, Nicolette. So I've made inside-out leadership seem very simple with that explanation, but of course, inside-out leadership is not simple. The dilemma that we have as leaders is how do we navigate multiple change responses and types of resistance that you see on the right here, while trying to drive the intended impact of the change that we're leading at different levels, which you see at the left there. So I'm sure we can all testify that this dilemma exists whether you're leading a change in culture, that Linda touched upon a little bit, an automation change that Shingi touched upon, or just an organizational structure change, right? And to dig into this complexity a little bit more, for us in finance, any change typically does not affect one group only. It often extends to impact cross-functional teams that we work with that have shared processes with us, often our business stakeholders, our IT stakeholders, and it could impact external stakeholders as well at varying levels. And then in addition to managing multi-stakeholder impact, leaders are also dealing with different layers of change resistance. Very broadly speaking, these can be identified as active change resistance, passive change resistance, and constructive change resistance. And I'll touch upon these concepts a little later in my slides. Then aside from managing multi-impact change and multi-layered resistance, leaders are also dealing with organizational barriers, right? And I know Linda touched upon a little bit upon this beyond their control. So examples being tedious and bureaucratic decision-making processes, budget limitations that all could slow down the change process. So as you can see, leading change really demands a lot and it brings in a dilemma for us as leaders. Next slide, please, Nicolette. So why do people resist change, right? And looking at the individual factors that on the slide, when I reflect on myself and the moments where I've not been keen on a change, it is fear of the unknown. It is human nature, right? We all experience it. It's often a reaction that many of us have when a change process starts because we simply do not have the full context of what the change means to us as individuals. As Linda mentioned, we tend to be comfortable with the status quo that has seemingly always worked for us. And sometimes it also stems from prior experiences that we've had with change that have not been positive. On an individual level, people also resist change if they stand to lose something from the change. So if it threatens their power, be it their position due to a reorganization, their skills from an automation perspective, or their control of a process, that is over-reliant on them. Shingi mentioned that, the fact that people tend to think that automation will replace their jobs rather than an enabler, and this is actually a factor, that leads to resistance. Resistance may also come from a point of not feeling equipped for the change. So skills readiness is very, very important as leaders think through system changes or any automation initiated changes. From an organizational level perspective, people can resist change firstly due to just lack of communication or inconsistent communication, which impacts the whole trust building process that's needed to effectively lead change. Secondly, a lack of clarity. I mentioned earlier that there is an inherent change resistance due to fear of the unknown that we all have, and I know I've often heard from people, that I'm leading that, Nancy, look, I understand the change, but what does the change mean for me? People want to understand the impact of the change on them before they can buy into the change. Lastly, culture is a huge factor. How we've handled past changes as leaders, our track record is very important. That shapes whether people accept or resist any subsequent changes that we lead. So leaders starting with a good track record, where there's trust and credibility, they'll typically find it easier to navigate influencing change and face less resistance. Next slide, please, Nicolette. So in the introduction, I mentioned that we are in an era of always on change, where the only constant is change, right? I know Linda also touched upon this, that the demand we all face for continuous adaptation due to external factors. However, one thing that I did want to specifically call out as a key watch out for us as finance leaders that does play a large part into influencing change resistance is change burnout, or change fatigue, as it's often referred to. Yes, change can sometimes be too much on our teams, and it can manifest as a resistance to change. And so if you see here the definition of change fatigue is the frustration, the apathy, and resistance that can arise amongst employees subjected to frequent, ongoing changes in organizational structures and processes. So it's important for leaders to firstly prioritize change, especially internally initiated change, to ensure that it's the right timing for the change, and then also ensure that any change that you're leading as a leader is aligned to the vision, so that those you're leading are not lost, on the vision of your organization due to the constant shuffle that comes with change. Next slide, please, Nicolette. So I've talked a little bit about why people resist change, and hopefully you're now wondering, how do we as leaders identify change resistance? If you recall from my opening slide again, the leadership dilemma includes managing multiple facets of change resistance: passive, constructive, and active change resistance. So what behaviors as leaders do we need to watch out for that signal resistance? How does resistance manifest in those we're leading through change? So firstly, it's that passive resistance. And this is where our teams or our stakeholders, they're silent during a change that you're leading, right? They seem disengaged. They do not want to provide feedback. In general, there's a low energy from them or low excitement for your change. The second one is constructive resistance. And this is probably the best form of resistance, where there is trust. Employees or your stakeholders, they're engaged, they're enthusiastic about the change, and they provide valuable feedback throughout. The only drawback that you would have with this resistance type is that there are multiple voices, multiple input from the feedback you received that may slow down the process of decision-making during the change and ultimately the actual change. Whereas with passive resistance, there is a little impact from the behaviors on change progress, because employees and stakeholders are generally just going with the motions of your change. Lastly, we have active resistance, which is the most overt and very, very difficult one to deal with, the one that we as leaders try and avoid, but we can't. And this is where employees or your stakeholders are just not on board with your change. They do anything and everything to provide negative feedback. Their energy is high, but it's high energy against the change, and their negativity can often cause a slower change process and outcome. Next slide, please, Nicolette. So with this, what can leaders apply as standard change management practices to navigate change resistance? I do know that there's a lot of change management models that leaders can apply, just depending on the type of change you're leading. But I'd like to believe that these 5 that you see across here span across all the models and are general practices that we can apply as finance leaders. First one is communication. So keeping that communication constant during change is important via multiple modes, so surveys, feedback sessions, one-on-ones, focus groups, all important to foster that, to foster the relationships that you need and build trust for the change. Secondly is the tools, so training, tailored resources, and assigning coaches and buddies. I think Shingi touched upon, upskilling your team for any automation initiative changes, all equally important to ensure that change readiness for your teams. Third one is recognition, so offering rewards and incentives for change milestones or wins. It also includes offering rewards and incentives for change behaviors, desired change behaviors with your teams, to change agents who role model, support for the change. I think this goes a long way to bringing the passive resistance, and I'll talk about that a little bit about that on the next slide. Involvement, which is involving your stakeholders and at key decision points throughout your change process, involving your team members in the ideation sessions, really just creates that shared ownership for the change, that support for the change, gets their buy-in, and a shared vision and goal for the change. Change agents are also equally important. So, you'll have those early adopters for your change. So leveraging those early adopters to help you influence, the late adopters, those that are a little bit sticky in terms of coming on board with the change. And we'll talk a little bit about change agents a little later on. Next slide, please, Nicolette. So with knowing the indicators of change resistance and the change management practices that I just went through, the very general ones, we'll go through a few simple cases to demonstrate how leaders can shift resistance to adaptability. So the first case is, stakeholders have been constantly providing you as a leader negative feedback about how an upcoming organizational structure change in your team will impact efficiency of a shared process. This is, of course, active resistance based on what I shared earlier on. And for this type of resistance, communication is important. An open dialogue is key on change milestones and to clarify how the change impacts their process. Involvement of stakeholders in key decision points, as I mentioned, that will ultimately impact their processes will help you to foster buy-in and shared ownership, which may likely lessen that resistance to change. As I mentioned, when people are involved coming up with what they desire from a change, they are less likely to resist it. Case 2 is your direct report appears distant and non-receptive to an automation change in your department and seems hesitant to speak up or provide feedback. This is passive resistance, again, based on what I shared earlier on. Again, involvement will be very key for this type of resistance. Typically when employees do not understand how the change will impact them, they're uncomfortable with the change and may appear distant. So involving employees at ideation stage may give them the context they need and foster their ownership of the change. Communication is always a key enabler. Communication is the golden thread with any change management initiative. And articulating what benefits your team gains from the change is important. Multiple feedback methods, as I mentioned before, are also important, as some people may not be comfortable speaking up. So make use of surveys, focus groups, one-on-one sessions to ensure that those quiet voices on your team are also heard. Lastly, recognition will be important, ensuring that you articulate the desired behaviors towards the change right from the onset, to the team, and then rewarding those wins, celebrating the small wins associated with the change. That's, and those behaviors, rewarding those behaviors that support the change may incentivize a shift from the resistance. The last case is your manager is excited for the new work your team is taking on, but has provided valid input on ensuring team readiness for the change in terms of skills and capacity. And so this is constructive resistance, as I mentioned earlier on again. Your manager has provided valid input. It is worth taking this feedback into account. When employees do not feel equipped for the change, they are likely to knowingly or unknowingly resist change. So tools are important. Providing structured training and resources to ensure that your teams are upskilling for the change is very important. And this is part of ensuring that you're also setting up your team for success, and as well as yourself as a leader for success. The aspect of change agent also comes in. So you can leverage your manager's excitement for the change. You can lean on them as a change agent to mobilize excitement for the change through communications with the team. and just having that buy-in from leadership also demonstrate the support from the top for the change. Next slide, please. I wanted to end off by saying that change resistance is not a barrier, it's a signal. It is a dilemma, as I mentioned earlier on, but it does bring opportunity for you as a finance leader to consider valuable feedback that can enhance the change experience for those going through it, as well as your intended outcomes. So your role as a leader is to be visible and accessible to your team during the change. Over-communicate rather than under-communicate. I always say that no amount of communication is too much communication. And then lead by example. Just simply be transparent with what is going on where you don't have answers. Ask for feedback. And this allows you to build trust and buy-in for the change that you're leading. And that's all that I have. Thank you all for listening. Thanks, Nicolette.
Thank you, Nancy, for that engaging presentation and sharing your insights with us. So for our participants, I have just shared the next poll. If you could take a moment to complete that for us, please. So I think we're getting closer. All right. Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to share our results on the screen. Okay. And with that, I'd like to invite Linda, Shingi, and Nancy to join me on camera for our panel discussion. Just a reminder for everybody, if you have any questions for our panel, please put them into the Q&A tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. Okay. All right, so I have a couple of questions here for our presenters. I'll start with Linda. So Linda, can you tell us a little bit more about adaptability and how you make adaptability part of your team's everyday culture?
So Nicolette, I think it's very important to, thinking back at my slides, it's about where are we and then where do we want to go? And then taking a little bit from Nancy's slide, it's all about then communication. So understanding what is causing the transformation and the change, then figuring out where we need to be, and then communicating and over communicating that. And then constantly checking in with your teams to see, is it working or not working? If we're trying to implement something, and then, and then being able, even within that transformation, then to shift, to be able to constantly shift. I mean, I just thinking back, I've implemented some software at a large company last year, and we were working through a timetable, and the last minute something didn't work the way it was planned, and I panicked because we were supposed to go live. And in that instance, I realized, kind of like gone back to my experience, is that be calm. Where do we need to be? And then trying to problem solve within that within that environment. So I think it is as leaders, you being able to remain calm and then trying to have different things. I think you're showcasing to your team really what a leader is, and your team feeds off the energy that you're projecting. So being confident in your ability to lead to that change is quite important.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate those insights. Moving on to Shingi. Shingi, you had mentioned, some of the difficulties within a team when you are automating processes is they have a fear, fear of change, a fear of losing their jobs. So can you tell us a little bit more about your insights as to how you build trust in a team?
So like I mentioned in my slides, just making sure that the culture in the team is one that fosters automation and AI use. As I mentioned earlier, a great example, Hack Week. Just take an hour out of Hack Week, block calendars, tell everyone that for this hour, we're focusing on automation and AI, and see what the team comes up with. And I think when you create a culture that enables the teams to think outside the box, I think that really helps, and that they also don't have a fear that they'll lose their jobs, because they're the ones that are being asked to come up with the ideas. I think there's a difference when you're bringing outside parties to come up with the ideas rather than actually getting the team members themselves to come up with the automation ideas. So I think just the culture and empowering the team, making sure that they're always playing around, very curious about learning about automation. I think that really helps team members feel safer.
Thank you, Shingi. Nancy, here's a question for you. What techniques have you used to influence change when you didn't have formal authority over the resisting stakeholders? So you had mentioned, about all the different functions in an organization that may be impacted.
Thanks, Cynthia. That's a good question. I think, people underestimate the power of co-creation, right? So involving your stakeholders right at the onset of you, before you even initiate the change, right? I found it very useful for me to talk to the key stakeholders that will be impacted by the change, pitch, almost like a pitch to them, that this is what I want to do, and how will it impact you? Because I think once you understand how it will impact your stakeholders, particularly where you, like to your point, to that question, Nicolette, where you don't have that direct reporting relationship, it's then a lot easier to articulate the benefit of the change in their language. And I think that's what's important to bring them on board. I think also people underestimate the value of networking in an organization, right? We always preach network, form allies, and this concept of allyship. I've typically leaned on some of my networks, some of the influences that come with my network to talk about a change for me in rooms that I'm not present, right? Or where they lead, just so I can get that buy-in for the change. And then I think once you're on the road to the change, once you've got that initial alignment, it's important to always articulate the quick wins, right? That the change has already brought this benefit for us, right? And I think that helps you to build trust, with these stakeholders, particularly where you didn't have a pre-existing relationship with them, which goes a long way to completing the change process, right? And having the desired outcomes that you were hoping for.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm just looking at our questions. Linda, here's one for you. You had mentioned in your presentation about technical teams and building client-focused teams. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you helped your teams become more client-focused?
Yes, I think that is really a great question. I think that our teams are very focused on executing, and I've been there too, as a junior person, and so you're executing what your manager is telling you. And as I've progressed in my career, I think it's very important to become, it's important for me, not right, to be more client focused, but it's important to then communicate to your younger team members really what that client focus is. So not only to rely on the execution, but why we are, executing. So it's not just talking about the methodologies and the processes, but what are the fan of outcomes? So are we trying to reduce risk? Are we optimizing returns? Is it time saving? Like, what is our client focused on, so that your team's not just focusing on execution, they are looking at it through that client lens, which I think is important. And then networking, I think, allow your team to sit in on calls so that they can hear directly from your client what it is that they want, like what language are they using, what is important to them, and if you're allowing your team to be part of that meetings, when you're communicating, they're understanding exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And so, that's really the advice that I would be giving is try to be inclusive in your communication, but don't try and always make sure that you bring in your teams within meetings so that they can hear directly.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda, for those insights. Okay, so going to be launching our final poll. We're almost at the end of our presentation. So yeah, I would like to thank Linda, Shingi, and Nancy and remind attendees that our next webinar will be our Core Network USA AGM on the 20th of November. The session is open to all members living in North America and members of our funding institutes, ICAEW, ICAS, SICA, CANS, and Chartered Accountants Ireland. If you've not received an invite to this event and would like to attend, please reach out to David Powell. So we'll share his email address in the presentation. And to everyone, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and remind you to share your comments in the survey that will appear on your screen when you exit. Thank you for attending, and goodbye.